Calyrex-Shadow might be the most broken Pokemon of all time, and with Regulation G just around the corner, it'll be making its long-awaited return to VGC. And today, we're going to be looking at some of the best ways to counter this stupidly broken Pokemon. Now guys, in order for us to understand how to beat a Pokemon like Calyrex, first we must understand why this Pokemon is so good. Now, I will do my best to keep this brief, as I did do a video on Calyrex a couple of days ago going over why this Pokemon is so broken, but this is just something I made, when talking about the video, so I thought I would quickly go over it and just use it to kind of explain the thought process here, right? So, Calyrex-Shadow, what makes this thing so good? First of all, look at its stats, right? 165 speed, 165 special attack, 150 speed. This is the second fastest Pokemon in the metagame, only being outsped by Regieleki, which is honestly not a very good Pokemon right now, essentially meaning Calyrex-Shadow, when it wants to be, is almost always going to be the fastest Pokemon in the game, bearing a couple options, which we will go over later in the video. Another stupidly broken thing about this Pokemon is its ability as one, which gives it Unnerve and Grim Neigh. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what Grim Neigh does, essentially every time you pick up a KO, you get +1 to your special attack stat. And again, this Pokemon has a ridiculously high special attack stat, so as you can see here, if you get to +1 and you are max timid like we are here, all of a sudden you have way over 300 special attack, which is absolutely absurd. But honestly, it gets better for Calyrex, right? It has this beautiful move called Astral Barrage. As you guys can see here, this is a 120 base power ghost move that has 100% accuracy, and it essentially has no drawbacks, and it hits both opponents. Really what this Pokemon does is it kind of just gets the snowball going, right? If you can protect this Pokemon with something like Redirection, or even just, threaten a turn 1 KO with something like Helping Hand plus Astral Barrage, all of a sudden this Pokemon can absolutely snowball out of control, and it becomes honestly a bit ridiculous, right? It threatens so much damage on turn 1, and the fact that you can hit both Pokemon is incredibly good, especially too if you are in a position where your opponent can't pick up the KO. To make things even better though, it also gets access to a Stab Expanding Force, which once again is absurdly broken on this Pokemon, especially when you factor in the fact that this Pokemon is 4 times weak to Dark, and therefore it really does not want to take, things like Sucker Punches, right? What's one of the best ways to stop something like Sucker Punch? Psychic Terrain. What benefits from Psychic Terrain? A Stab Expanding Force. Now, again, there's a lot of different sets, and if you guys are interested in that, I did go over it the other day, so make sure you check out that video. Honestly, this Pokemon does have, quite a few sets right now that I do think are really good. I'll briefly show you guys some of them here. But in saying that, right, let's talk about some of the things that do beat Calyrex, and then I'll kind of break each one of them down, give you guys some different options, and kind of, explain why I think they are so good. So first of all, you want Pokemon that resist its dual stab of Ghost and Psychic, because really, outside of Dark Pulse, it really doesn't want to run anything else outside of its stabs. So because of that, 2 massive typings are the Dark and Normal type. Normal types obviously are immune to the Astral Barrage, and Dark types resist both the Astral Barrage and they're also immune to the Expanding Force, which is obviously very, very good, right? What other things also beat Calyrex? I think, blocking its Psychic Terrain is also very good. There are other options as well, like just being faster than it and KOing it. Obviously, we did talk about this Pokemon being the fastest Pokemon in the game, but obviously there are other options as well, right? Things like Booster Energies, Choice Scarf, and of course as well, then it goes on to things like Speed Control, right? Tailwind, Trick Room, and Icy Wind. My God, I can't believe that was so hard to get out. And then of course, the other major thing here is we spoke about having 2 busted stab moves here that are both spread moves, so because of that, Wide Guard is also very good. Now guys, before jumping into which Pokemon I think specifically are very good into Calyrex, if you could, for me, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing, and while you're down there, leave a comment. It really helps out. We're always here, we're just trying to boost the algorithm, trying to get the channel to more people, get everyone ready for the fun that is going to be this restricted format. So guys, to kick us off here, we have some Dark type Pokemon that I think are incredibly good into Calyrex-Shadow. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth with all of the sets here. I'm kind of just going to talk about why each one of them I think is very good, and then really we'll just kind of move on from there. So to start things off here, we have Assault Vest Incineroar. Now, I think Assault Vest Incineroar is going to be very good in this metagame for one big reason, right? Calyrex-Shadow, I expect to be the most used of the restricted Pokemon. Incineroar is one of your best answers into something like Calyrex-Shadow, but it also has the Unnerve ability. Now, for the majority of, its existence in Generation 9, Incineroar has essentially run 2 different items, right? It's either Safety Goggles or it's a berry of some kind, right? Whether that be something like a citrus berry, figgy berry, even like a sugar berry, right? Because of that, obviously having Unnerve, it can't eat any of its berries, and you don't want a Pokemon that you essentially want to bring to every game to never have its item, and because of that, I think Assault Vest will be very good. Not to mention, a choice spec Calyrex with Helping Hand, I believe can still two-shot most Incineroars, right? And because of that, I do think it's going to be very, very important to make sure that you're just never really threatened by this Pokemon, right? Even if it is next to something like, an Indeedee that can give it, a Helping Hand plus Psychic Terrain, you just want to be able to say like, hey, I can remove this Indeedee with like knockoff into Blitz or whatever, and then still be sticking around to, threaten, something like a, just a potential knockoff into it, right? Because of that, obviously, Incineroar, great typing, a very natural Assault Vest user, also has access to things like Knockoff, a very strong Flare Blitz, and Parting Shot, which I think are all very good into Cali. Next guy here is obviously Big Ting-Lu. Assault Vest also is incredibly good on Ting-Lu. I think everyone kind of knows what Ting-Lu does at this point, right? It's a very bulky Pokemon, has a very good HP stat. Special defense stat, while, it does look kind of lackluster, obviously its ability really makes up for that. Vessel of Ruin really slowing down, the damage output, I think, of a Calyrex-Shadow Rider is going to be very big in this metagame. Especially too, because there are others, there are some other really good Pokemon that I think Ting-Lu is going to be really good into, at least in the, terms of restricted, right? You're talking about things like Miraidon and Lunala, which I think both are very good. Even something like Terapagos as well. Ting-Lu has a pretty good matchup into it, especially with moves like Ruination. Because of that, I do think Big Ting here is going to be one of the best, Dark types in the format. I definitely expect to see this mon rise up. I personally haven't seen it too much just yet, but since Kyogre isn't too popular, I definitely think Ting will be good. And again, its matchup into Cali, it's just fantastic, right? It has the Stab Throat Chop, so it has things like Ruination if it does go for Terrors. And of course, Assault Vest plus Vessel of Ruin just really slows it down. Then we have King Gambit. King Gambit is another really interesting mon, right? Because one, Incineroar is going to be on a lot of teams just because of how good it is into Calyrex, and it is going to be a lot of teams' best ways to kind of answer it. So obviously having Define is very nice, but also just having, the Assault Vest here, right? Because one, you're already, again, you're immune to the Expanding Force, you resist the Astral Barrages, but also, you can take the Dark Pulses, which we kind of talked about these Pokemon, Calyrex using as its kind of, last stab option, right? Yeah, there will be Calyraxes that definitely run Terra Fighting, Terra Blast. I do want to throw that out there because it does really struggle into, things like Steel and Dark types. But still, regardless, I think if King Gambit can force out, a potential Terra Fighting, it does put it in a very good position. But not to mention, if you're ever in a situation where the Calyrex-Shadow Rider does not have, a way to stop priority or redirection, Sucker Punch obviously can just threaten a one-shot, and of course, Cat-Tack Leap also deals massive damage, right? And it does, it does just put you in a great position where, even if you go for something like a Defensive Terror, something, say, like, for example, let's just say Flying, which I think will be pretty good. Even Grass could be, a decent option. Right, even Fairy as well, right? Use one of these terrors that allows you to eat, any one attack from a, from the Calyrex-Shadow, and then with this very high, physical attack stat, the Cat-Tack Leaves, the Sucker Punches, even the Iron Heads are all going to do a lot of damage. So our next guy here is T-Tar. Now, T-Tar's in a really interesting position, so I do kind of expect T-Tar to actually rise up in usage. Obviously, we have, some weather-restricted Pokemon out there like Koraidon, not Miraidon. And then obviously Kyogre and Groudon, right? Which it doesn't necessarily have a great matchup to any of them, but Assault Vest T-Tar is still incredibly good, right? Having Sandstream giving, obviously Rock types a +1 to their special defense stat plus Assault Vest makes this mon incredibly hard to deal with, right? And again, it's a Dark type that basically has double speed depth and has access to things like Knockoff. Because of that, is incredibly good into some of the Calyrex that, obviously going to be running around. Now, it will struggle a little bit into the Mienshals, but regardless, it is still a great defensive pivot into things like Calyrex, and because of that, I definitely think it's worthy of being on this list. Now, the next two Pokemon here, I was actually going to put a little later in the video when we kind of talk about, Pokemon that can outspeed and threaten a one-shot, but I thought, you know what, we're talking about Dark types, these guys are both Dark types, let's just throw them in here. First one is a Pokemon I'm actually personally a really big believer of right now, and that is Chi-Yu. Now, look, I will actually give you guys a EV spread for this guy because I do think EVs on this are actually pretty good. So there is a spread I've personally been running. It's this one right here, right? I'll give you guys a little information here, right? So a 68 for Chi-Yu will always live 2 specs Astral Barrages coming out of a Calyrex, which I do think is pretty important because Chi-Yu at times, may have to be your switch in into something like Calyrex, right? Then as well, the modest 196 set here with Flamethrower. I did put Flamethrower on this because I do think Wide Guard's going to be very good. And because of that, I don't really want to risk the Heat Wave, especially when you are pairing it up with like potentially your own Calyrex. But a no bulk will take, I think if you're playing against no bulk Cali, you have an 80% chance to KO it with this set, which is really nice. And then obviously at that stage, any Calyrex is just not eating an overheat, right? Like those 40 points difference, it doesn't matter how bulky you're running it. Like you'd have to run it really, really bulky. And even at that point, it's like whatever. And obviously we're talking about the fire moves here because if you just click either of these, it's just going to fold if it doesn't Terra. And then, of course, we have Roaring Moon, one of my guys. I actually think Roaring Moon will be a really good support Pokemon in this upcoming metagame, especially with Groudon, because this is like obviously a Pokemon that doesn't hate running, you know, something like the Terra Flying, right? But also too, you know, if you could find different ways to activate your booster energy, then you can still run some like potentially acrobatics plus like, you know, get the sun, which is boosting up your speed. And then obviously just, you know, you've got a different item, whatever it might be. But again, talking about it as a support, right? This thing has access to things like Tailwind. Obviously it has Knockoff, it has Snarl. You know, it just has a lot of like really good things, even Breaking Swipe as well, right? If you just wanted to kind of run it as like a really bulky support that gives you speed control. But yeah, this is another Pokemon that is incredibly fat, especially like its HP special defense stats are both really, really nice. And again, it has a really nice speed tier where if you ever get the booster up or potentially Sun, you can definitely outspeed them and just, you know, threaten massive, you know, one-shots on them. So now I want to talk about the normal type Pokemon that I think are really good into it. And to start with, we're going to go with Farafrig here. I actually think, unironically, this might be the best Pokemon into Calyrex in the game. Obviously, when you look at its stats here, HP is very good, but its special defense is pretty bad. But of course, you can always just kind of, you know, tweak that around to make sure that you're always living what you need to. But the major thing here is, one, it's a normal type, therefore it is immune to Astral Barrage, even though it is obviously, you know, Psychics are weak to it. Very, very nice. But two, it resists Expanding Force. Essentially, you just resist everything this Pokemon wants to go for. And on top of that, you also have a very nice special attack stat. You also have access to things like Shadow Ball, and you have access to Trick Room, which I think is very good, right? We spoke about, you know, Calyrex-Shadow being the fastest Pokemon in the format, so just having the option to flip the speed on it, I do think is going to be very, very good. And not to mention, you also have Armor Tail as well, which is really good, you know, when you talk about potentially, you know, try to stop its partners from like maybe trying to snipe you with something like that's not a Fake Out, like a Grassy Glide, an Aqua Jet, whatever it might be, Sucker Punches. Plus, it also, I think, just pairs really, really well with most of the Pokemon that kind of want to take it on, right? Then we have P2. So P2, very, very similar to what we just said about Giraffe, right? It has Trick Room, it has Shadow Ball, right? Very, very good. Flipping the speed, you know, threatening one-shots with Shadow Ball, I think is very, very good. But it also has access to a Violite. Now, everyone knows what P2 is, right? This is one of the bulkiest Pokemon in the format, and with a bit of SPDEF investment, you can make sure you easily live things like Helping Hand, Expending Forces, off-toy specs, which I think is very, very important. And again, you can always threaten the one-shot with Shadow Ball. You can always, you know, set up the Trick Room if your team needs it, and I do think it is just very, very good, right? And then we have Terapagos. Now, I realized I didn't actually put any moves here on Terapagos, which is my bad, but I think this is also incredibly good, right? Obviously, being a normal type, once again, it is immune to the Astral Barrage, but with Terra Shell plus Calm Mind here, this Pokemon can actually really hard wall it, right? If you pair it up with one of its common partners right now, which a lot of people are running, Terra Steel Comfey, which is actually pretty good, which is, I think, really nice. You can just go like Terra Shell plus Calm Mind. If they go for the Expanding Force, then they're doing no damage really to either Pokemon. But also if they go for the Astral Barrage, then you know, you just keep your Terra Shell, you get up the Calm Mind, and then all of a sudden it becomes really, really hard. Not to mention, you know, again, Comfey paired up with Terapagos is a Pokemon that likes to set up Trick Room, and is obviously very, very nice into it. And of course, if you can ever force the Terra out of it, Terra Starstorm's just one-shotting it. Like a +1 Terra Starstorm off this one. Unfortunately, it doesn't show off its full stats here. But yeah, Terapagos is like really, really good into it. But the other thing with Terapagos as well is something that we'll go into as I jump over to the next mons here. And that is the option to block its terrain. Now, while this one I don't think is as important as potentially resisting some of its attacks, I do think having the ability to switch up the terrain on it is going to be very, very good. Obviously, a Terapagos that does go for its Terra Stella does wipe all terrain and weather, which I do think, again, is very, very important when you're fighting up against something like the Calyrex-Shadow. And look, not to mention as well, this Pokemon, it can just eat the hits coming off it, right? It switches up the terrain and it honestly just fires off massive damage, which is very, very important. Then we also have Rillaboom. Now, again, Rillaboom is one of the best terrain changes in the game. Honestly, you could also throw Miraidon on this list as well, but I don't love Miraidon's like direct matchup into it. Miraidon with support is definitely fine, but I don't think the mon by itself is particularly like, you know, as good. But again, the ability just to change its terrain, I do think obviously is very, very nice. But Rillaboom has Assault Vest as probably its best item. It also has, you know, Grassy Surge here, then it has Fake Out plus Grassy Glide. This is really good for pinning it in the late game, right? Because if you can ever force it into something like a Terra Normal, Terra Fairy, Terra Dark, you know, any Terra that isn't Terra Ghost, you can essentially just like pin it. Because late game, like your Wood Hammers, your Grassy Glides are doing so much damage to it. So yeah, if you can like ever get it into a board state where like it's forced to Terra, again, you can threaten with the Fake Out, you can get rid of its, you know, potential psychic terrain. I do think it puts you in a very nice spot. So this group of guys here is the Outspeed and KO Pokemon. Now, for the sake of it, I have put a Speed Booster Fluttermane here, or just a Fluttermane in general. The idea would be to go Speed Booster because it allows you to, you know, obviously go faster than it. But really, I think a Choice Specs Fluttermane in Sun with a Timid Nature is also a very, very good option. Because even if they do go for a defensive Terra Fairy Moonblast of a Specs Fluttermane is very, very good. And not to mention, as long as you Terra out of your Ghost typing, this bulk here is all you need to always live a Specs Astral Barrage, which I do think is very, very important. And obviously being a potentially faster Ghost type and just threatening the one-shot on it is very, very nice. Not to mention Fluttermane also puts a lot of pressure on the partner Mienshao as well, which I do think is very, very good. Then we have Urshifu Dark. Now Urshifu Dark is another really good option. I kind of said it before in the last video about Calyrex-Shadow Rider, but a max speed Adamant Urshifu will actually be 1 point faster than the Calyrex-Shadow Rider with a Choice Scarf. So Calyrex-Shadow Rider hits 222 max speed, whereas a Choice Scarf Adamant max speed Urshifu hits 223. So that is very, very important to keep in mind. But not to mention Wicked Blow, Sucker Punch. Honestly, even like the Focus Sash set is also really good into it as well. But yeah, having the Sucker Punch to potentially snipe it, if they don't have any redirection is very, very good. And obviously having Wicked Blow to pin it, with a Choice Scarf is also incredibly good. Then we have Iron Jugulis. Now, this is another Pokemon I think is going to be actually very, very pog in the upcoming metagame. Simply because, one, it obviously has access to booster speed and it's a Dark type, but two, Snarl, Dark Pulse, and also has access to Tailwind, I think is just really, really good, right? You compare this thing up with Miraidon, get the speed booster, it's great. You can honestly just use it as a casual Tailwind setter as well, I think. Just as long as you run something like a Timid Nature, right? Get the speed boost, throw off some Snarls, some Dark Pulses, and I think it's just in a really good position. It's a Pokemon that also, being a Dark type, honestly doesn't care about Psychic Terrain. One thing you do have to keep in mind, though, obviously, is that because you are off the ground, you aren't immune to the priority block. But regardless, I still think Iron Jugulis is an incredibly good Pokemon when it comes to, matching up against it. Just because, again, its HP is pretty nice. Its special defense is kind of whatever, but this is another Pokemon where if you pair it with Miraidon, you could potentially even just slap an Assault Vest on this thing and just run like 4 attack. You run like Air Slash and then whatever coverage move this one has. I actually don't even know what you could run on Assault Vest. Kind of just came to my mind then. Does it have like an electric move? Hurricane's nice if you're in rain. It gets charged being PogChamp, 70%. That should be 100% and never miss, man. But yeah, look, it has a lot. Like, dude, it also gets Meteor Beam. That's actually really interesting. I don't think Meteor Beam's good, but it's definitely interesting. But I definitely think you want to go like just a booster plus Tailwind set, right? Just go like Tailwind here, and then honestly probably just drop the Air Slash for protection. Something like that I do think is very, very good. And then the final one I've kind of put on for the Outspeed KOing. This one shouldn't be here, but it kind of, I guess, just represents all Sucker Punch users, and that's Brute Bonnet. And I put Brute Bonnet here because I unironically think this mon is like actually pretty decent, right? When you think about it, it has a pretty decent matchup into things like Miraidon. It also is honestly like pretty good into things like Calyrex-Shadow as well. You have a look at its HP and special defense that are very good. It also gets access to a Stab Sucker Punch, which is never a bad thing. But it's also a Protomon, right? So even if you go up against things like Groudon with a defensive Terra like Fire, for example, you can just go like Terra Fire in front of it and then just go like Seed Bomb and threaten one-shots as well, which I do think is actually pretty good. And yeah, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Brute Bonnet starts seeing some play because this one has like a really good attack stat and it also has access to Spore. So like I could see a world where you even just like run this thing with like Clear Amulet, like double stab protect. Like honestly, something like that could be really good. And again, having that Sucker Punch just straight up threaten out the Calyrex-Shadow, I do think is very good. But yeah, again, this is more or less here just to kind of talk about really just all of the Sucker Punch users in general, right? There's a lot of them, you can talk about things like Chen Pao and whatnot as well, but I didn't want to make this way too long. But obviously Chen Pao, Ice Spinner, another really good option. So the final group of guys we're going to talk about here, at least, show off some examples for, is the Wide Guard users. Now, again, Wide Guard is an incredibly good move when you go up against Caly-Shadow, and I think it is a big reason why a lot of Caly-Shadows should always run Shadow Ball as an option, because the last thing you want to do is go up against something like a Lunala and really just run into Wide Guard spam. Now, I will say one thing about Lunala. You look at this Pokemon, it shares the exact same typing, and a lot of people will sit there and tell you that, hey, Lunala is just the worst Calyrex-Shadow Rider, but I think they are very different Pokemon, and I think Lunala with Terra is potentially one of the best Pokemon that actually got introduced in this generation. And I'll probably, do a video talking about it being one of the more underrated Pokemon in the coming days. But really, Lunala's job here is to just go Wide Guard and Trick Room, right? Wide Guard, again, stops the Astral Barrage. It stops the Expanding Force spam. Trick Room just says, hey, I'm going to go first next turn. And again, being a Ghost type, you can just threaten massive damage into it. Now, Mienshao is a Pokemon that we kind of touched on being, being one of Calyrex-Shadow Rider's best friends, but it is also one of its worst enemies. Obviously, it does have access to Wide Guard, which is very, very nice. It also has access to things like Fake Out, obviously stop the Calyrex-Shadow's partner potentially, but Feint is also another really, really big one as well, because say, for example, you have your own Mienshao and they go for Wide Guard, then you can just Feint and break their Wide Guard, and then obviously look to threaten a KO with potentially your own Astral Barrage, which I think is very, very pog. Zacian-Crowned is another restricted Pokemon as well that gets access to Wide Guard. Now, I don't necessarily know how good Zacian is into it, but in saying that, it is a Pokemon that is neutral to both the both attacks, but it also has a stupidly high special defense stat and normally pumps into its HP. So it is a Pokemon that can eat attacks coming off it, and it does get access to things like Crunch as well to threaten out the one-shots in return. And it is also a pretty fast Pokemon, so if you pair this up with any form of speed control, you can easily outspeed and threaten a one-shot, which I do think is very pog. Another one here is Araquanid. Now, Araquanid is a Pokemon with a stupidly high special attack stat, but it is also a Trick Room sweeper as well. So because of that, it is a Pokemon that loves going just max HP. Obviously, your special defense stat is already super high, and you are a natural Wide Guard user as well, which is very, very good. And again, with an ability to like Water Bubble and access to some powerful Waddle Stabs, you can also just deal massive damage to it in return. Now, Iron Valiant is another one I, at first, was like kind of umming and ahhing on putting on this list, but I ended up opting for it because it has really two really good options going for it, right? One, it's a fantastic partner when paired up with that good friend Miraidon, but two, it has access to both Wide Guard and Icy Wind. Now, Icy Wind is something that we'll kind of touch on in the next part of the video when we talk about speed control, but again, this is just a Wide Guard Pokemon. I think it does it really good. Booster Energy is just here to say like, hey, you can go for Booster Energy plus Icy Wind, but I do think Focus Sash is probably the better item on this Pokemon. I'll just quickly kind of throw that out there. But yeah, this is a Pokemon that can go like Icy Wind, Wide Guard, and then just potentially double stab, right? Whether that be like Moonblast, Close Combat. You can even go like Moonblast, Shadow Ball, and just like drop the fighting coverage as well if you wanted. But yeah, it has a lot of options. You even see here, it's got support options as well, like Coaching, which is honestly not too bad, right? And then the final one here is Gallade. Now, Gallade is a Pokemon that you'll see a lot on Psy-Spam. And one of the worst things, when you go up against a Calyrex is you really don't want them to use your Psy-Spam, right? If you're going to set up the Psychic Terrain, you don't want them to beat you with it, right? And because of that, I think Gallade is very good, right? This is a Pokemon that is commonly paired with, pretty strong Trick Room teams and has access to both Wide Guard and Trick Room, which again are both incredibly good into Calyrex. Now, this last group we have here, I don't actually have anything planned out for it, but this is really just that speed tier stuff we were kind of talking about, right? This is the Trick Rooms, the Tailwinds, the Icy Winds, right? Like, right now, when I think of Trick Room, I think of two different archetypes, right? So you've got the Caly-Ice stuff, and then you got the Dialga stuff, right? So the Dialga Origin. Basically, Calyrex-Shadow Rider is a Pokemon where, again, you pair it up with something that, did I just call it Shadow Rider? Calyrex-Ice Rider. If you pair it up with like obviously a way to stop them from potentially spamming out stuff, you get up the Trick Room and then you can kind of sweep through from there. Because again, this one can either hit, especially with Terra, and then fire off massive damage in return. Dialga, very, very similar, right? It doesn't love eating the it doesn't love eating the Astral Barrages, but the Psychic moves it can eat pretty handily. And again, its stats are pretty high as it is. It can normally live one and just get off the Trick Room, which is very, very nice. Now, in terms of Tailwind, obviously, the main ones that come to mind, you got Tornadus, right? And you got Whimsicott. They are the two major ones, obviously, are the ones that I basically first think of, right? But then again, we also have, some of the Paradox Pokemon that we spoke about earlier, being Roaring Moon and Iron Jugulus, which I do think are both very, very solid. And then, of course, Icy Wind as well. Again, we're talking about things like Iron Bundle here, right? Obviously, we also kind of touched on it before. Iron Valiant, yeah. Then you've also got, obviously, Speed Booster Fluttermanes, which we kind of spoke about as well, yeah. Basically, anything that can outspeed it and go for, things like Icy Wind, even like Electro Web. Another really interesting one that I've kind of been, like, looking at and flirting with the idea of is actually Sandy Shocks. I ironically think Sandy Shocks on a Sun team is, like, half decent, because you have access to things like Gravity, so that your Precipice Blades never miss. Then you also have Electro Shot as well, right? Electro Web. And talking about Electro Web, of course, that also extends over to things like Regieleki. I'm pretty sure actually Miraidon Electro Web. Call me crazy. I think Miraidon gets Electro Web as well. Let me double check that. I lied, but Raging Bolt gets it as well. And Thunderous is actually another like really good one. Dude, that's actually something I didn't even touch on as well. I was meant to do it with P2, but like Thundy gets like access to Eerie Impulse, and P2 also gets access to Eerie Impulse. Like this is another really good way of slowing it down. Honestly, in hindsight, now that I'm thinking about it, I really should have had like a damage reduction tier, because I also think that like Grimmsnarl with screens is really good into it. Oh, dude, I like stuffed up, man. I should have added that. Yeah, like Grimmsnarl with screens is really good because again, it's a dark type, it resists, and it's immune to the main 2 stabs. It sets up light screen, which is really, really good. Obviously, Thundy has Eerie Impulse as well, which is like really, really nice. And then also like kind of an extension as to what we spoke about with some of the dark types like Chiyu and Iron Jugulus, right? Just spamming out things like Snarl also is just like super, super good, yeah. But like, I think there are a lot of ways that you can actually deal with this Pokemon. And that's kind of why like, I really hate when I see people, especially in the comments, being like, this Pokemon's too broken, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be a boring metagame. Like, this Pokemon's too good. Like, don't get me wrong. It's going to be incredibly centralizing. I think it's going to be the best Pokemon in the format. I'm not going to lie. It is the Pokemon I'm most excited to play with because it fits my playstyle, right? I like to go fast. I like to hit hard, right? Calyrex-Shadow, it fits that, right? And I get it. It's going to be really obnoxious playing those mirrors. But I do think there is actually quite a bit of counterplay. And people are kind of just... Like, again, at the time of recording this, we're like 4 days into, like, the pre-format, right? Like, literally EUIC is going on while I'm recording this. I literally just watched Gabe Agadi win round 1. And I'm just sitting here, like, you know... I'm like, it's still, like, so far away. So many of the top players haven't even started looking at this format yet. So, like, for anyone who's, like, super, super worried that Cali's just going to completely dominate, I'd say don't stress. This isn't going to be, like, Incineroar levels of, you know, usage. Like, I would expect to see Incin at, like, 70% usage, honestly. It's, like, that good into this restricted format. And same with Fluttermane. I think Fluttermane and, you know, Incin, maybe not 70, like maybe 70 is a bit high, but I wouldn't be shocked if they both keep 50% through the restricted format. But yeah, I think Cali's still going to be really, really good. Don't get me wrong. It's probably going to be the most used restricted Pokemon, but I'm just saying, keep an open mind, guys. I don't think this Pokemon is so stupidly broken that it's unwinnable. It just means that you have to prep your teams for it, and you can't necessarily just throw together whatever you want anymore, because we are in a restricted format. I'm sorry, but, you know, you guys can't run, you know, some of the lesser Pokemon just because you want to, yeah. But anyway, guys, that's gonna be it for this video. Let me know what you down. Let me know what you down below. Let me know what you think down below of Calyrex-Shadow Rider. And let me know if you think I missed anything, right? I definitely think there are a lot of good options into this Pokemon, and I'm really curious to see what you guys think are also really good into it. Yeah. Anyway, guys, that's it for this one. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.